This video is the first one on this channel that I had some reservations and doubts about making. There are way over 300, actually probably closer to 400 strategy games on the Amiga, and in most cases they were at least decent, and in majority of cases quite good if not exceptional. Although I've played many of these, definitely some of the most well-known titles, I haven't played them all. Some because I never had a chance back then, others because I couldn't track them now, or simply didn't find time for it, and lastly, some I never even knew about. And that is why I was unsure about making this video. Eventually, I decided to pull the trigger anyway. After all, there will always be some new games made even after the system is long dead, or old seemingly forgotten titles will surface, or even hidden gems will be brought back to life. It's just impossible to make one forever accurate list. So I made my own, based on my experience and memories, and hopefully at least a little accurate. But before we get into it, please hit those like and subscribe buttons below. It's just a click here and click there for you, but helps me more than you know. Thanks. Rampart is probably the most odd and seemingly out of place title on this whole list. But in the same time, in multiplayer mode it can be the most fun to play. It's an arcade port, so technically it could be best classified as an arcade strategy game. The game of Rampart progresses in pairs of stages, where first one is always a defense stage where you have to destroy as many attacking ships as possible in given time. Second is the main meat of the game, the fortifications building stage, during which you have to assemble as good defenses as you can, using Tetris-like shaped wall fragments. They can be rotated freely and have to be placed around castles. The more castles they encompass, the more points you get to build cannons. Keep in mind, however, that at the end of this stage, at the very least, one castle has to be completely surrounded by walls, as otherwise the game is lost. So what's so strategic about it? Well, aside from the arcade defense bit, you have to calculate and manage your time strategically to best optimize your time division between securing kept castles and expanding towards the new ones. It sounds simple, but can be very hectic and most importantly, very fun to play against another player. Centurion is a de facto Total War game released 13 years before the first official title in the series was, and by a completely different developer. The main strategic map pictures Europe and North Africa divided into sectors that loosely correspond to kingdoms as they were back then. This is where you and your enemies command the armies into battle and conquest, on both sea and land. Tactical battles take place in more Total War-esque environments, so battlefields where each army has all their units present and they can be directed to take various formations and perform defense and attacks. It's definitely a highlight of the game, as it was the first title, at least to my knowledge, that put so much attention to importance of units, formations, flanking attacks and morale. Other than that, Centurion also allows for organizing of games in Rome, and they, in the form of gladiatorial combat and chariot races, are a nice break from gameplay routine. If played correctly, they can also prove to be a decent source of income for forming new armies. Centurion is a simple strategy with surprisingly deep tactical combat and a blast to dive into once in a while. Warlords is an interesting title and has very Middle-earth-esque feel to it. It bears quite a bit of resemblance to Heroes of Might and Magic Series 2, albeit in much more basic form. You move your heroes on the map and each of them commands an army composed of various fantasy units. The aim of the game is very simple: to drive your chosen race to victory by defeating all other opponents. And you can do it as one of the few staple fantasy races: humans, elves, orcs and dwarves among others. At first, combat may seem very basic, as it's dice-based, but upon closer inspection as you play, you'll notice that it's surprisingly deep and takes many other factors in mind, like individual unit statistics, heroes' modifications, artifacts, special abilities and terrain. Warlords is a game that doesn't look like much, but is really fun to play, especially in multiplayer, where even up to 8 players can compete for the land on a single Amiga. I couldn't decide for a little while whether Battle Eye or History Line should be placed here. They are, after all, both games by the same developer, using same engine and identical rules. But finally settled on the earlier one, as it was the first to be released and to introduce their unique gameplay mechanics. BattleEye is a tactical turn-based strategy game in sci-fi setting using hex-tiles, grid maps and joystick controls. It has very low entry point, meaning even those who never played strategy games can enjoy it. Especially that all battle outcomes are neatly animated in a style similar to that of Advanced Wars on GBA. Don't let it fool you though, as later battles in the campaign can be very demanding and pose a serious challenge. Each turn is divided into 2 stages, one for movement of units and other for combat. It's an excellent title that's even better when played with a friend in split-screen versus mode. Some of the hardcore strategy fans might disagree with my choice here, calling North and South a strategy game, but despite what they may say, even if very simplistic, it was one. In fact, I'd classify North and South as a board strategy game with series of minigames used as means of resolving various in-game events and battles. The main screen shows the simplified map of eastern US divided into also simplified states, and the gameplay loop revolves around titular civil war where one player controls the north and the other south. Even though the basis of real civil war was quite an important subject, the game doesn't take itself too seriously and everything is light and funny, not getting into any details of it all. It's an okay game when played alone, and an absolute blast when played against others. It's a great game to lose some friendships over. On the first glance, Colonization looks like a reskin of Civilization. It's the use of similar, tile-based engine that's the confusing factor here, as despite some similarities, it's an entirely different game. For starters, it doesn't start in prehistoric time and only covers colonization period of North America. Then it focuses more on trade and training and hiring of skilled workers for various shops, rather than research of new units and buildings. And finally, it also tackles subjects of contacts, relations and cooperation with natives and with old world forces that want to keep their stronghold on this new one. It's also a story of struggle for independence and final conflict with British forces. I wouldn't say that it tells the story of conquest of New World as it really was, but as a background for an interesting strategy game, it works great. It's a cool title worth having and being played by any true strategy aficionado. Let me preface what I'm about to say with stating that I'm not big on real-time strategy games, at all. I always found them to be too hectic and too chaotic to be able to perform in them as well as in turn-based ones. That, however, doesn't mean that I didn't play them or enjoy them. Amiga, over its short span of lifetime, had many firsts, and Dune 2 arguably could be considered very first ever modern RTS. It forged many of the tropes of the genre that were present in all RTS titles ever since then, things like building layout, resource gathering, minimap, 3 different houses, you may think of them as 3 different nations, with their respective campaigns and terrains influence on gameplay. The attention to detail was uncanny, and the only thing it really lacked to be perfect was multiplayer, which was added on in 1998 in its successor in the form of Dune 2000 on PC. The Settlers is a unique title that, while not being the best strategy on the system per se, represented the very best that Amiga could offer as an overall package. Starting with incredible animated intro, through catchy music and sound design, to excellent pixel-perfect graphics, and most of all, challenging but addictive gameplay. Released in 1993, when programmers and artists knew how to squeeze out everything out of the aging machine, it became an instant hit. In Settlers, you're tasked with leading your nation to greatness by claiming new lands and defeating obstacles, both natural and in the form of foreign enemies. What struck everyone back then though was the unique gameplay mechanics of laying out roads and setting up placeholders for buildings that then are erected by tiny animated workers literally brick by brick. Having to manage long chains of supply and demand and available resources also helped to keep the title fresh for multiple playthroughs. Not to mention couch versus where 2 players could play against each other with 2 mice on a split screen. There is no doubt in my mind that it's one of the most important titles in the history of gaming. UFO Enemy Unknown is so good and such an amazing title that I completed it on my basic 1MB A500 more than once. And whoever played it on Amiga, and as you will see in this video, knows very well not only it did not run well on this configuration at all, but also the latter game turns, especially when CPU was moving, could take long enough to make tea, visit bathroom and make a couple sandwiches. Not necessarily in that order. And each of hundreds of combat encounters in the game could take from just a dozen of turns to even over 100. It's one of those games that proved that by 1995 Amiga was on its dying breath and it was time to move to PCs. But enough about me and my undying love for the game or Amiga's demise. Enemy Unknown is one of my two most favorite strategy series to date, second being the next spot on this list. It's a mixture of grand strategy, worldwide anti-alien defense, with base building and management, and all that with good old tactical turn-based squad combat. Not many games gave you that much choice and freedom back in the day, and not many had such an uncanny atmosphere to them. This is where it all started 30 years ago, and ever since then till today I still play the Civilization. Perhaps now in the modern, more streamlined and bigger outing, but it doesn't change anything. I thought long and hard about placement of all games on this list. So many of them were so good after all. This is the only one that I knew from ground up where it belonged. The grandest of all grand strategies. In Civilization you lead your nation, your empire, from prehistoric times to modern and future eras. All throughout the history, loosely based on our own. You're responsible for everything from placing cities and their management, through building and assigning units to terrain improvements, and lastly, warfare. It can be won and lost in many ways, and each is equally as enjoyable and addictive. Many alliances were forged and broken, and many wars were started over a tile or two of land. It's a gem amongst gems, and a true and only title worth of this first spot, despite even the ungodly long initial load time when the world was created on 1MB machines. Wow, this was one hell of a video to make. Not when it comes to editing though, but when I replayed games to record them, I had to go through quite a lot of titles that never made it to the list. And some of the ones I did play were so addictive that all of it took me considerably longer than I expected. Whatever you wanna say about Amiga and games it had in various genres, you cannot say that it lacked good strategy games. Anyway, if you liked the video, please hit those like and subscribe buttons below. It's just a 2-click action for you, but helps me grow my channel and motivates me to make more videos. And if you're in especially generous mood, you may want to consider a small donation. It would help me make better quality content, replace my aging editing rig, and possibly even get a camera. Details are in the description below. That said, for me this is all for today, so have a good one and I'll see you next time.